This rocket killed 9,000 people. Building it killed more than 20,000, and then the men who made it were handed the American space program. In July of 1969, an estimated 600 million people stopped what they were doing and watched a man climb down a ladder onto the surface of the moon. It is the proudest thing our species has ever done. The rocket that carried him there was designed by a man who, 24 years earlier, had been an officer in the SS. His name was Wernher von Braun, and the weapon that made his reputation in Germany was assembled underground by concentration camp prisoners in a tunnel cut into a mountain. More people died building that rocket than were ever killed by it. This is the story of how America went looking for Hitler's rocket scientists, found them, rewrote their files, and handed them the space program. Wernher von Braun was born into an aristocratic German family in 1912. As a teenager, he was obsessed with spaceflight, with the idea of leaving Earth entirely. The problem was that nobody in Germany was funding dreams about the moon. The army was funding weapons. By 1937, he was technical director of a secret research center at Peenemuende on the Baltic coast. He joined the Nazi Party that same year. 3 years later, he joined the SS, and by 1943, he held the rank of Sturmbannführer, equivalent to a major. What his team built there was called the A4. Hitler's propaganda ministry renamed it the V2, Vengeance Weapon 2. It was the most advanced machine of its age. In October 1942, a test flight crossed the boundary of space. It was the first object ever made by human hands to do that. The rocket that would one day reach the moon began as an object that touched the edge of space and came back down on a city. From September 1944, V2s fell on London and on Antwerp. They traveled faster than sound. There was no siren because there was no warning. People heard the rocket only after the explosion, if they heard it at all. Around 9,000 people were killed in those attacks. According to his own colleagues, von Braun said after the first successful strike on London that the rocket had worked perfectly, except that it had landed on the wrong planet. The weapon killed 9,000 people. Building it killed more than twice that number. In August 1943, the Royal Air Force bombed Peenemuende. The Germans moved production somewhere the bombers could not reach, inside a mountain. The Mittelwerk was a network of tunnels cut into the Kohnstein hill near Nordhausen. To build the rockets, the SS set up a concentration camp beside it, called Mittelbau-Dora. In the first months, the prisoners were not allowed out of the tunnels at all. They slept underground, in the rock dust, beside the production line. Around 60,000 people passed through Dora and its subcamps. At least 20,000 of them died there. They died of exhaustion, of hunger, of disease, and some were executed in front of the others as a warning. That is the number that matters in this story. The V2 killed roughly 9,000 people as a weapon. It killed more than 20,000 as a product. Von Braun went to the Mittelwerk. The records and his own later statements put him inside that tunnel more than a dozen times. After the war, he said the conditions there were repulsive and that he had no power to change anything. That is his account of it. What is documented is that he saw it and that he kept building. 18 months later, this man was the most valuable prize in Europe, and two armies were racing each other to reach him. By early 1945, the Red Army was closing on Peenemuende, and the war was over in everything but name. Von Braun gathered his senior staff and put the question to them directly. Which of the victors should we surrender to? They chose the Americans. It was a calculation. They believed the United States would pay for rockets and would not shoot them afterwards. So they forged travel documents, moved thousands of people and their equipment south into Bavaria, and hid 14 tons of blueprints in an abandoned mine shaft. A bargaining chip. On the 2nd of May, 1945, von Braun's younger brother Magnus cycled down a mountain road towards an American checkpoint. He spoke enough English to make the offer. The most important rocket engineers in the world were up that hill, and they wanted to come in. Von Braun surrendered with his arm in a plaster cast, broken in a car crash weeks earlier. In the photograph taken that day, he is smiling at the camera. While that was happening, American units were emptying the Mittelwerk before the region was handed over to the Soviets, as the Allies had agreed. The United States shipped out roughly 300 railway wagons of V2 components. The Soviets arrived too late for the hardware, so in October 1946, they took the people instead. In a single night, in an operation called Osowiakim, more than 2,000 German specialists and their families were moved east. Most of them were not asked. America had the rockets, and it had the men. There was only one obstacle left. The president had banned exactly this. The program that brought them to America was called Operation Paperclip. The name is literal. A paperclip was attached to the file of every specialist the military wanted to keep. More than 1,600 German scientists, engineers and technicians came to the United States under it. There was a problem. President Truman had given a clear instruction. Nobody was to be admitted who had been a member of the Nazi Party or an active supporter of Nazi militarism. By that standard, most of the Peenemuende team was disqualified. Von Braun's own security file described him as a potential security threat. So the files were rewritten. The agency running the program produced new reports. Damaging assessments were softened or removed. Men who had been classified as ardent Nazis were quietly reclassified as nominal ones. The paperwork was made to fit the policy, instead of the policy being applied to the paperwork. They went first to Fort Bliss in Texas and to the White Sands Range in New Mexico, where they launched the V2s that had been shipped out of the tunnel. The same rockets, the same engineers, a different flag. 12 years later, the same man was on American television explaining space travel to children. In 1950, the team moved to Huntsville, Alabama. In 1955, von Braun became an American citizen. That same year, he appeared on television for Walt Disney. 3 episodes, watched by tens of millions of Americans, in which a charming German engineer explained how humanity was going to reach the moon. He was no longer a captured enemy specialist, he was a celebrity. Then, in October 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, and the United States panicked. Von Braun's team put America's first satellite into orbit within months. NASA was created the following year. Von Braun became director of the Marshall Space Flight Center, and there he finally built the machine he had wanted since he was a boy, the Saturn V, 110 meters tall, to this day the most powerful rocket ever flown successfully. Presidents shook his hand. He was on magazine covers, and almost nobody in America was asking who had assembled his first rocket, or where. It took until the 1980s before anyone opened those files again, and when they did, one man packed a suitcase. Arthur Rudolph had been operations director of the Mittelwerk. He ran the production line inside the tunnel. He knew exactly who was assembling those rockets and under what conditions. He came to America on paperclip, and in the 1960s, NASA made him project manager of the Saturn V program. The man who had run rocket production using concentration camp labor was now running rocket production for the moon landing. In 1969, NASA gave him its Distinguished Service Medal. 10 years later, the Justice Department's Office of Special Investigations began examining his war record. In 1984, Arthur Rudolph signed an agreement. He would leave the United States and give up his American citizenship. In return, there would be no prosecution. He flew to Germany and never came back. He was never convicted of anything. German prosecutors looked at the case and closed it in 1987. Wernher von Braun did not live to see any of it. He died in 1977, an American hero. There is a photograph taken on the moon in July 1969. A boot print in grey dust, sharp at the edges, in a place with no wind to erase it. It is probably still exactly as it was. That print was put there by a machine designed by men who had built a weapon inside a mountain, using people who were worked to death. Both of those things are true at the same time. The achievement is real, and so is the price that somebody else paid for it. History does not let you keep only the half you like. 600 million people watched the moon landing. Almost none of them knew whose hands had drawn that rocket. What else have we only been told half of? Subscribe for more forgotten history.